I have demonstrated that 3 out of the 5 bombs were planted by Zionist activists, Jewish activists in Baghdad on the orders of the Mossad. So Israel had a hand in the 3 out of the 5 bombs, which accelerated the exodus of Jews.
What is your message to the progressive movements in the West in regards to Zionism? Should they be anti-Zionists?
Without question.
Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive with me. My name is Ahmed Al-Naouk and I'm a Palestinian journalist from Gaza. And today I'm very happy to be joined with an amazing professor. He is Avi Shlaim, an Israeli-British historian, and he is also Emeritus Professor of International Relations at University of Oxford. Today, we will study the march of Zionism, and we will go deep into the policies and the modus operandi of Israel and its operation in Gaza and the West Bank. We will talk more about the genocide in Gaza and the role of historians in documenting and evaluating history as it's unfold. Professor Avi, thank you very much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Professor, let me start by asking you, as an Iraqi Arab Jew who is a historian, one of the leading historians in the UK, when you watch what is happening in Gaza, the dissemination of the Gazan population, the infrastructure, the genocide that is taking place in Gaza, how do you, as a person, as a historian, feel?
As a historian, I always look at the roots of any contemporary conflict. And in the case of Gaza, the historical background is one of Zionist settler colonialism. Noam Chomsky observed that settler colonialism is the most extreme and vicious form of imperialism. And the Palestinians, for the last century, have had the misfortune, the terrible misfortune of being at the receiving end of Zionist settler colonialism on the one hand and Western imperialism on the other. First, under the British Mandate for Palestine, which ended in 1948, and since then under American imperialism. Britain in 1917 issued the Balfour Declaration in support of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. In 1917, the Jews were 10% of the population, and they owned only 2% of the land, and the Palestinians were 90% of the population. Yet the British government, in the Balfour Declaration, allocated to the Jews political rights, national rights, and denied them to the majority. And to add insult to injury, the 90% were described as the non-Jewish communities in Palestine, as if you weren't Jewish,
minorities.
You didn't count.
So allow me to ask you, you are a Jewish Arab.
Yes.
You were born in Iraq, in Baghdad, and when you were 5 years old, you left Iraq to Palestine. Tell me more about your life and your family's history in Iraq and Baghdad.
I would just like to complete my answer to your last question to say that, as I see it, the ghastly war, Israel's ghastly war in Gaza, is the direct consequence of the Balfour Declaration. So we see the cruel climax of Zionist settler colonialism supported by American imperialism and Western imperialism in general. Now to turn to your last question, I'm an Arab Jew. I was born in Baghdad in 1945 to a Jewish family. We were Arabs. We spoke Arabic at home. Our social customs were Arab customs. Our food was Arab food. My parents' music was a nice blend of Jewish and Arabic music. That was our identity. We were very proud Jewish Iraqis. And Iraq had many minorities, and the Jews didn't stand out. In Europe, the Jews were the other, and the Jews symbolized the other. In Iraq, we were one minority among many, and there was a long tradition of religious tolerance and coexistence between the minorities. The Jews in Iraq had very deep roots. They were there since the Babylonian exile 2.5 millennia ago.
Wow.
So we weren't newcomers. We certainly weren't intruders. We were in Iraq before the rise of Islam in the 7th century. And there were thriving Jewish communities in the Arab world, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Egypt, throughout North Africa. Thriving Jewish communities who lived in peace with their Muslim and Christian neighbors.
And in one of your interviews, you said that under the Ottoman Empire, the Jewish people thrived.
Indeed.
At the time of the Holocaust and the anti-Semitism campaign against the Jews in Europe, the Jewish Arabs were thriving under the Ottoman Empire. But at the same time, we hear a lot of people who say that the Jewish people were always persecuted in the Arab world. As a historian, what do you say to that? Were there literature of anti-Semitism in the Arabic culture? How were the Jews treated really in Iraq and in Palestine? Because, you know, I have a grandmother. I know a lot of old people in Palestine who told me before the Nakba they had Jewish friends, they had normal relations, they were friends, they were neighbors. At the time where the Jews were persecuted in Europe.
I'll make 2 points. One about the Ottoman Empire, and the other point is about anti-Semitism. The Ottoman Empire was corrupt, incompetent, ramshackle, authoritarian, but it had one saving grace, and that is it allowed civil and religious autonomy to all the minorities.
Okay.
And there were many minorities in the Ottoman Empire, and there were open borders, so you could sustain multiple loyalties, loyalty to the empire and loyalty to your own communities. And it's in this very flexible framework that the Jews did really well and really prospered. The Ottoman Empire collapsed in 1918, and the victors in the First World War, Britain and France, imposed a new order on the ruins of the Ottoman Empire. And the logic of the Ottoman Empire was pluralism of coexistence, whereas the logic of the British Empire in the Middle East was division, nationalism, which means division, because nationalism is a very divisive and negative ideology. So in Palestine, you couldn't have multiple loyalties. You were either a Palestinian or a Jew. And Britain sided with the Jews and helped the Jews to prosper and to build a state of their own, and hampered and repressed Palestinian nationalism. So the Ottoman framework suited the Middle East much better than what followed after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. And there were, under the Ottoman Empire, there were many successful Jewish communities, as I was saying earlier, but the Jewish community in Iraq was the most ancient, the most distinguished, the most prosperous, the most successful, and it was the best integrated into local society. So the Jews didn't stand out. The Jews were part of Iraqi society, and they played a very constructive part since the end of the First World War. After the end of the First World War, they played a very constructive part at every level in nation building in Iraq. Until the emergence of the State of Israel, which was a real landmark. Now, the second point is to do with anti-Semitism. The Zionist master narrative says that there was always anti-Semitism in the Arab world and in the Islamic world, that anti-Semitism is deeply embedded in Arab culture, that anti-Semitism is pervasive, and it is anti-Semitism that drove the Jews out of the Arab world. And I say no, this is historically not true. Anti-Semitism is a European malady. Anti-Semitism was born in Europe. It goes back to the medieval Christian church, which persecuted Jews because they didn't recognize Jesus Christ as the Son of God. So there is a long European tradition of anti-Semitism. And it took Europe much longer to accept the Jews as equals than it took the Arab world. It is interesting, and I would argue that anti-Semitism was exported from Europe to the Middle East. It wasn't born in the Middle East. It was exported to the Middle East.
How was it exported?
There was no anti-Semitic literature in Arabic. So anti-Semitic literature had to be translated from European languages to Arabic, like Hitler's Mein Kampf.
Yeah.
And in the 1930s, in Iraq, there was a surge of pro-Nazi sympathies because the British imperial power, the British imperialists were so unpopular that there was quite a lot of sympathy for Nazi Germany in the 30s. And there was a spread of anti-Semitic propaganda in Iraq. So the Zionist master narrative says that the Jews were driven by anti-Semitism from Iraq, and this is historically not true. It was after the 1948 war, Arab-Israeli war, and the establishment of the State of Israel that real serious persecution happened.
Yeah, and you investigated 5 bombings that happened in Baghdad against the Jews that eventually drove most of the Jewish people from Baghdad to Israel. Can you tell me more about this investigation?
In 1950, there were 135,000 Jews in Iraq. By the end of 1952, there were only less than 10,000 Jews left in Iraq, and they were not mistreated. They were allowed to get on with their lives. But 125,000 Jews ended up in Israel. Many of them ended up in Israel reluctantly because in 1950, the Iraqi government passed a law which said any Jew who wants to leave the country is free to do so on a one-way visa. And the Jews didn't have passports, so they couldn't go anywhere except Israel. So that's why so many of them ended up in Israel. Only a handful of Jews took advantage of the new law, denaturalization law, tasqit. And then 5 bombs went off in Jewish buildings and in Baghdad. In my research, I have demonstrated that 3 out of the 5 bombs were planted by by Zionist activists, Jewish activists in Baghdad on the orders of the Mossad. So Israel had a hand in the 3 out of the 5 bombs, which accelerated the exodus of Jews. Now, my Zionist critics say that the bombs were marginal. It's anti-Semitism that drove the Jews out of Iraq. And it's not part of my argument that the bombs were the main reason, but they were a contributory factor. And I'll go further than that and say, even if I knew for sure that not a single Jew left Iraq because of the bombs, I would still say this is a real indictment of the state of Israel, because Israel was created as a safe haven for Jews. It was not created in order to create uncertainty and insecurity to force Jews to leave their homes and to go to Israel. And furthermore, the bombs in Iraq were not just a one-off. They were part of a pattern of Zionist operations. This is not my phrase, someone else coined it, cruel Zionism. Cruel Zionism meant using violence against Jews elsewhere. And in this case, it was the Mossad that recruited local Jews, decent, altruistic Jews, and turned them against their homeland, turned them against their people, turned them into spies, and worst of all, turned them into terrorists, using bombs to frighten people to leave the country. This wasn't a one-off. In 1954, there was the so-called the Lavon affair, when a ring of Jewish saboteurs were caught red-handed planting bombs. And the whole ring was rounded up, including its controller. And the controller was Max Binet, a Mossad officer who committed suicide in prison. And he's the same person who had instigated the bombs in Iraq in 1950. So there is a pattern of cruel Zionism, of uprooting the Jews from the Arab lands and bringing them to Israel. And the experience of individual Jews, Iraqi Jews who ended up in Israel, varies. But for the community as a whole, the experience was like a tree being pulled up by the roots.
Wow. And during your research, did you find that the Israeli Mossad did a similar policy in other countries other than Iraq, hurting Jews to encourage them to migrate to Israel?
Yes. In Yemen, Israel played a part in organizing the exodus of Yemeni Jews, about 50,000 Jews. This was with the approval of the British. The British gave the Israelis the green light to transfer the Jews from Yemen to Israel. And the other important country where this happened is Morocco, where the Mossad had close links with the regime, with the royal family under Hassan II, and the Mossad organized the emigration of a large number of Moroccan Jews to Israel. So yes.
So the Mossad was really hurting the Jewish people, like killing them, making some of them terrorist bombing, doing some bombings, and turning against their neighbors, their countries in Iraq, in Yemen, in Morocco. One would say that the Mossad and the state of Israel was doing this because they care about the Jewish people who live in the Arab world and they want to create a safe haven for them in Israel. So you are a Jew, an Arab Jew who was born in Baghdad, Iraq, and then you came to Israel. When you came to Israel, how did that change your life? And I understand that your father was a wealthy man. He was upper middle class. He had his own business in Iraq. When you moved to Israel, how did that change your life? Was it for the best or for the worst?
Very much for the worst, because we were very privileged. We were a very wealthy upper middle class Jewish family. My father was a very wealthy merchant, and he was very well connected. My parents had a very high social status, and we lived in a palatial home with a lot of servants, so it was a very comfortable, settled way of life, and we were very happy. And my parents had a lot of Muslim friends. And once I asked my mother, she used to talk about the wonderful Muslim friends that we had. And once I said to her, did we have any Zionist friends? And she said, no, Zionism is an Ashkenazi thing. It's nothing to do with us.
Wow.
So if left to our own devices, we would have stayed. And my father couldn't speak any other language apart from Arabic. And even when the bombs started and life became unsafe, he wanted to stay.
Mm.
And he had an Iraqi passport, and he could stay. But my mother was worried about the children, and she said to him, it's not safe for the children to stay here. So he agreed, and we left the country. And we lost everything. In Israel, there is the term aliyah. Aliyah means migration to Israel. And literally, aliyah means ascent.
Yes.
Going up to the promised land.
Like in Arabic, aliyah is like ali. It came from that source, I think, which means high.
High.
Okay.
Ali. But for my family and me, the move from Baghdad to Israel involved not ascent,
Descent.
but yerida, very steep descent to the margins of Israeli society.
Wow.
And we lost everything in the move. We lost all our wealth, and my mother was a survivor and resourceful. And when our money ran out, she went to work as a telephonist in the town hall in Ramat Gan, and she became the breadwinner. Whereas my father was 50 when we arrived in Israel. He never learned Hebrew properly, and he was two failed business ventures, and then he was unemployed. So for him, it was a really disastrous move from Iraq to Israel. The move was disastrous for him, but he was stoical and he never complained. He never complained. He was silent, but he was really a broken man as a result of the move from an Arab country to the state of Israel.
Wow. Tell me more about how the Mizrahi Jews are treated in Israel. And I'm asking this because my father used to work in Israel for 20 years as a laborer. And he was telling us his stories. He once told me that he had a Jewish Israeli friend who came from Iraq, and he was always complaining to my father about how he was treated. This Iraqi Jew, he was a warden of a prison in Gaza. He told my father that he has always served in Gaza. He was brutalizing the Palestinians to appease his Israeli officers, but he was always treated like a second-class citizen. Was that true in Israel?
In 1950, Israel absorbed a large number of immigrants, some from Eastern Europe, but a large number of immigrants from Iraq and other Arab countries. When they arrived in Israel, at the airport, they were sprayed with DDT, they were sprayed with DDT as you spray animals.
Wow.
So this was the first encounter with the promised land, which is very humiliating and upsetting. And then they were taken to transit camps, ma'abarot, the plural for ma'abara. And conditions in the transit camps were very, very poor. Everything was very elementary. They lived in tents or in shacks. Hygiene, the arrangements were very primitive, and they really suffered. But the food was very alien to them, European Jewish food, which is not the food they were used to. But worst of all, the managers of the Ma'abarot were all Ashkenazi Jews with a Eurocentric view, and they looked down on the Oriental Jews. They knew nothing about our culture, our achievements, our status in Iraqi society, and they looked down on the people in the Ma'abarot as inferior, and they thought they should be grateful for what they are getting instead of complaining. And the Zionist narrative says that the Jews in the Arab countries, in Iraq in particular, were in danger of being overwhelmed by a second Holocaust. And Israel offered them a safe haven. This is the narrative, but it's a false narrative. And I looked really hard for evidence that the intention of the Zionist leaders was to rescue Jews, and I couldn't find any evidence, which confirmed my view that the Zionist leaders were ruthless. They were hell-bent on building a new state, and they were use any means, fair or foul, in order to realize this ambition. And the first priority after the end of the 1948 war was Aliyah, immigration, and they went to any lengths to bring Jews from anywhere they could find them to Israel. And once the Jews arrived in Israel, they were not well treated. They were second-class citizens, and they remained second-class citizens. And there is still a cleavage today between Jews of Arab origins and Ashkenazi
Until
Jews.
now?
Until now, yes.
Wow. When you were 15, I believe you left Israel to study in the UK. And then you studied for 2 years in the UK?
3 years.
3 years. And then after that, you came back to Israel to serve in the Israeli army. Can you talk about your service in the Israeli army? Why was it important for you at that time? And then how did that help you understand the Israeli state and Zionism more?
I didn't do well at school. I had very low marks, and I failed English outright. And looking back, I think the reason is that I had a sense of inferiority because I was an Iraqi boy in a Ashkenazi-dominated society where all the elites were Ashkenazi, and I felt that they looked down on us and that they looked down on me. So I had an inferiority complex, and I didn't think I had any abilities or any talents. So I was a failing student at school, and I failed English, so that would have been the end of my school education. And that's when my parents sent me to school in London. And then I went to school in London for 3 years, and I got a place to read history at Cambridge, but then I went back to Israel. I was 18 to do national service in the IDF. So I did national service in the IDF, and I served proudly and loyally in the IDF. This was in the mid-1960s, before the June 1967 war, and I believed in the justice of our cause. I believed that we were a small, peace-loving country surrounded by predatory Arabs who wanted to throw us into the sea, and we had no choice but to stand up and fight. So I had no doubts at all about serving in the IDF. But June 1967, the war changed everything, and I was a first-year history student at Cambridge.
Yes.
And when the crisis erupted, I went down to the Israeli embassy in London, and I offered to go back and serve in the war that we all knew was coming. And they took my details, and I never heard from them again. And after that war began, the war transformed Israel. Israel captured 3 times its territory, and it became a fully fledged colonial power. It had colonial origins, but now it became a fully fledged colonial power. And my army, in which I believed, because in my time I believed it was true to its name, I thought it was the Israel Defense Forces. This army was transformed after the war into the brutal police force of a brutal colonial power. And that's when my disenchantment with Israel began.
Wow. So the disenchantment began in 1967?
Yes, but it was very, very gradual.
Wow. That's very early compared to many other Israeli historians and scholars.
My real transformation came much later as a historian. I focused, my main research interest became the Arab-Israeli conflict. So I spent a year in the Israeli State Archives, and the evidence I was confronted with completely belied the Zionist narrative of being a peace-loving country. So I was radicalized in the archives because I realized the gap between the official narrative and the reality of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. And I'm a diplomatic historian, and I also studied Israeli foreign policy and saw how it never really aimed at peace, that the main aim was land grabbing, was expanding the territory of Israel. So in a very real sense, I was radicalized not by political activism, but by history and the study of history, and I was radicalized in the archives.
So, Avi, after your disenchantment, you gradually started to become more and more anti-Zionist. Is that true?
Yes, but it was a very gradual process because I was a Zionist. The high point of my identification with Zionism was when I served in the IDF in the mid-1960s. Then I was a post-Zionist because I felt that by the eve of the June 1967 war, Zionism had achieved its main purpose. There was a viable Jewish state in Palestine. Mission accomplished, and now Israel had the option of trading the occupied territories with peace with its neighbors. But Israel chose to keep the West Bank and Gaza, and therefore there was no settlement of the conflict. So I was a post-Zionist in thinking that Zionism has achieved its main purpose. Now it needed peace with its neighbors so we all could get on with our lives. But it was not to be, because after the June 67 war, there was a convergence of secular Zionism with religious Zionism, and with a commitment to keep the West Bank, or to give it its biblical names, Judea and Samaria. And Zionism was never static. It kept evolving. And now, today, I dissociate myself completely with Zionism as expressed by the Netanyahu government. I reject it totally because it is a racist ideology and a racist program. And my evidence for that is the July 2018 Jewish nation state law, which is not an ordinary piece of legislation. It's a basic law which defines the character of the state. And it says, quote, Jews have a unique right to self-determination in the state of Israel. In other words, the Arabs, who are 20% of the population of Israel, have no right to self-determination. And it means that even if the Jews became a minority in Israel, they would still have a unique right to self-determination. So Israel today is, by legislation,
an official racist state.
Official racist state. Israel is the only officially racist state that I know, the only member of the United Nations which is officially racist. There might be other racist states, but they don't declare themselves in the way that this law defines Israel. But that's not the end of the story, because the present government, headed by Benjamin Netanyahu, is more extreme than that. The policy guidelines of the government that were presented to the Knesset and were approved by the Knesset, the policy guidelines say Jews have an exclusive right to national self-determination in the land of Israel.
Which includes the
West Bank.
In their mind, and Gaza.
So it's much more extreme than the 2018 law. And it doesn't say the Jews have a unique right. It says Jews have an exclusive right. So there is no room for ambiguity. Means, so Jews have an exclusive right to self-determination in the whole land of Israel, which includes the West Bank. So that's the official position of Israel, and Arabs, Palestinians, have absolutely no political rights in this space.
In your recent book that you published last year, Genocide in Gaza, you spoke about the logic or the modus operandi of Zionism, and you said that the Zionism ideology is not, it's not just an ideology, it's a set of practices towards land, geography, and power. How do you define this logic or this modus operandi historically?
The Zionist movement was a settler colonial movement, and Israel, its principal political progeny, is a settler colonial state. And the logic of settler colonialism is the elimination of the natives, the not compromise, not coexistence,
Not share lands.
not sharing the land, but eliminating the natives in order to take over the land and its resources. That's the basic ideology of Zionism and of the State of Israel. And the means by which this goal was achieved was ethnic cleansing. 1948, the first Arab-Israeli war, was involved the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. 750,000 Palestinians became refugees, and the name Palestine was wiped off the map. In 1967, Israel captured the West Bank, and there was a second wave. About 250,000 Palestinians, some of them second-time refugees, were not allowed to return to their homes on the West Bank. And ethnic cleansing, the Nakba, is not a one-off phenomenon that happened in 48. It's an ongoing process, al-Nakba al-Mustamira.
Ongoing Nakba.
Ongoing Nakba, and it continues to this day. And this process of ethnic cleansing has reached its climax in the current war in Gaza, which is about ethnic cleansing. The official aim, there was an official document of the Israeli government which was leaked. It was dated 13 October 2023, and it was a plan for depopulating the whole of Gaza. So this was the original aim, the ethnic cleansing of the whole of Gaza. Because of Egyptian resistance, this hasn't happened, but it's still the aim.
Yes.
To make Gaza uninhabitable, to get rid of the population, and to take over the land. And some of the extremist ministers in Netanyahu's government say this openly, that they want to expel all the Arabs, they want to wipe Gaza off the map, they want Israel to take over control and to rebuild settlements in Gaza.
Yeah.
So that's where Zionism has led to. And I would say that the war in Gaza, which is a colonial war, is a direct result of the Balfour Declaration, of the betrayal of the Palestinians by Britain. Britain is the enabler of the Zionist settlers. Britain is the enabler. Britain empowered and enabled the Zionist movement to take over, to begin the systematic takeover of the whole of Palestine, a process that continues to this day, and as I say, reached its climax in the ethnic cleansing and genocide in Gaza.
And you just said that Zionism, it changed over time. It evolved over time. We know that there are many strands of Zionism. And can I ask you, please, to explain some of the main strands of Zionism? There is the religious Zionism, there's liberal Zionism, social Zionism, and most importantly, revisionist Zionism. Can you tell me the difference between these strands? I'm particularly interested in revisionist Zionism.
Revisionist Zionism is the most relevant to understanding the character of the present Israeli government. And the leader of revisionist Zionism was Zev Jabotinsky, an ardent Jewish nationalist. In and the spiritual father of the Israeli right. Ben-Zion Netanyahu, the father of Benjamin Netanyahu, was the political secretary of Zev Jabotinsky. So Netanyahu grew in a revisionist Zionist home. And in 1923, Jabotinsky published an article under the title "The Iron Wall, We and the Arabs." And the article was divided into two parts. The first part was an analysis of the problem, and the second part was a prescription, how to deal with the problem. And the analysis said, the Palestinians are a people, they are not a rabble. No people in history have ever voluntarily made room for another people to come and create a state on its land. Therefore, Palestinian resistance to the Zionist project is inevitable. There is no peaceful settlement of this dispute. The only way to achieve the Zionist aim of an independent Jewish state in Palestine is unilaterally and by military force. The way to do it is to build an iron wall of Jewish military power. The Palestinians would knock their head, the Arabs would knock their head against the ramparts until they give up any hope of defeating the Zionists on the battlefield. And then there would be a change on the Arab side. The extremists would be discredited and the moderates will come to the fore. And then and only then would be the time for stage 2 of the strategy, which is to negotiate with the Palestine Arabs about the status and rights in Palestine. So this was the basic Zionist strategy in the conflict since the early 1920s. And there was the revisionist Zionists were a breakaway group from mainstream, or they were another branch of the Zionist movement. The mainstream branch was labor Zionism. And the difference between the two was in territorial terms. The labor Zionists had more limited territorial aims, whereas the revisionist Zionists were maximalists. They wanted a Jewish state not just in the whole of Palestine, but on the east bank of the Jordan as well. But where there was complete agreement between the two strands of the movement was on the imperative of using military force to achieve the goal of a Jewish state. Now, there is only one, the first Israeli prime minister to move from stage 1 to stage 2 of the strategy was Yitzhak Rabin. He moved to stage 2, negotiations with the Palestine Arabs about the status in Palestine. He negotiated the Oslo Accord. And it's the first time that an Israeli leader went on the political front towards the Palestinians. But the Oslo Accord was seen by the Palestinian leaders, by the PLO and its leaders, as the beginning of a process that would lead to a Palestinian state. But it was not to be. Oslo turned to be a trap for the Palestinian national movement. And there is a debate on why did the Oslo peace process break down. The official explanation is that the Palestinians were never reconciled to peace and they chose to return to violence. That's why it broke down. My explanation is that it was After the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, Likud came back to power under Netanyahu and set about the systematic dismantling of the Oslo Accords. So Oslo failed because Israel reneged on its side of the deal. So taking a broad historical view, I would say that the trouble with right-wing Zionism, revisionist Zionism, as expressed by the Netanyahu government today, is that it rejects any Palestinian rights to Palestine. It rejects any compromise. It's a maximalist movement.
And when Netanyahu came to power, even before he came to power, he came with a promise to thwart and destroy the Oslo Accords. He was never interested in making peace with the Palestinians. He was never interested in giving the Palestinians a state of their own. And I think what Netanyahu did is that he was trying to buy time to expand the settlements and take more and more of the Palestinian lands. At the same time, there is this myth that is in the West that says that the Palestinians were never interested in peace, that the Palestinians never missed an opportunity to peace. How would you respond to that?
It was Abba Eban who coined this phrase, that the Palestinians never miss an opportunity for peace. It's emphatically not true. It's totally not true as a description of the Palestinian position. After June 1967, the PLO steadily moderated its political program. In 1988, there was a Palestinian National Council meeting in Algiers, and it revolutionized the Palestinian position in the conflict by accepting Israel's right to exist, by accepting all UN resolutions relating to the conflict, going back to 181, the partition resolution of 1947. So this was a very moderate position which accepted Israel's right to part of Palestine. The PLO gave up its claim to 4/5 of historic Palestine in the hope of getting an independent state on the remaining fifth. But Netanyahu and his ilk rejected the whole idea of an independent Palestinian state. And the mission of his entire career has been to prevent a Palestinian state. And he has said that time and again. And it's odd that the Western supporters of Israel, Britain and America, for example, keep banging on about the two-state solution.
Yeah.
When Israel rejects a Palestinian state, and Israel is in control of all the territory. And also there was a contradiction in Western policy, in British policy, in calling for a two-state solution, but recognizing only one state, yes, and not recognizing Palestine.
So what is your message to the progressive movements in the West in regards to Zionism? Should they be anti-Zionists?
Without question, because Israel has violated every UN resolution relating to the conflict. Israel has violated every international law. In Gaza, Israel is daily committing war crimes, and Israel has become a rogue state. I don't say this lightly. My academic discipline is international relations. Yeah. The common definition of a rogue state is a country, a state that uses violence against civilians for political purposes. Israel does that. what Israel does in Gaza, by my definition, is state terrorism because it's violence against civilians. And secondly, it's a state that habitually violates international law, not just occasionally. And Israel systematically, all the time, violates international law and international humanitarian law. And thirdly, the third criterion is a country that seeks to develop weapons of mass destruction. Well, Israel isn't seeking to develop them. Israel is a nuclear power with an arsenal of between 90 and 100 nuclear weapons. And therefore, Israel is a rogue state, and therefore I expect any decent people with concern for justice to be opposed to the state of Israel.
As a historian, how do you view the Palestinian resistance to the occupation? Do the Palestinians have the right to resist the occupation?
Every people under occupation has the right to resist the occupation, including armed resistance. So the PLO, from the beginning, had the right to resist the occupation, including armed resistance. In the war in Gaza, following the Hamas attack on Israel on the 7th of October 2023, Israel claimed it had the right to self-defense. And all its Western allies keep repeating that Israel has the right to self-defense. But under Article 51 of the UN Charter, you only have the right to self-defense if you are attacked by another state. This was not the case. You don't have the right to self-defense if the attack came from a territory under your occupation. So you don't have the right to defend yourself against the occupied. It's the Palestinians who have the right to resist, including the right to armed resistance. And the PLO, Hamas attacked Israel on the 7th of October. I denounce that attack because it was directed against civilians. About 1,200 people were killed on that day. But I would like to make a distinction between the military and the civilians. Initially, the attack was on a military base, and about 350 Israeli soldiers and security people were killed, and about 800 civilians were killed. I denounce the killing of civilians. Killing civilians is wrong, period. Whoever commits it, it's wrong. But Hamas had the right to armed resistance against Israeli armed forces, so I'd like to make that distinction. And I'd like to say something else about Hamas. In the West, only the Israeli narrative of that day is reported, that Israel was attacked and Israel had the right to resist, to defend itself. The Hamas narrative is never reported, and Hamas has issued a document with its narrative of the 7th of October. No one mentions it, and it's a very important document. It says strict instructions were given to the Hamas fighters only to attack military targets and not to attack civilians. We know that things got out of hand and atrocities were committed. We are willing to have the International Criminal Court or any independent body come and investigate what happened, and we will punish our people who disobeyed the orders. Contrast this position by Hamas with the Israeli position, which is not to allow any international journalists to go into Gaza. So the media cannot check for itself what's happening, what Israel is doing. And Israel refuses any independent international investigation of its actions. So here you have Hamas willing to have an impartial investigation of what happened on that day, and Israel completely not allowing access to the media, banning journalists from going into Gaza, and at the same time refusing to submit to any international audit.
And the mainstream media refused to interview you since the beginning of the genocide. Is that true?
The BBC haven't interviewed me once since...
But that's interesting because you're one of the most important Israeli historians. Why do you think the BBC did not interview you?
I can only guess that it is because I'm a critic of Israel, and my views are too radical for the BBC, and because the BBC is a prime example of Western mainstream media complicity in Israeli war crimes and in the genocide. The BBC has been described, BBC has very good reporters on Israel-Palestine, but it has very cowardly leaders. The BBC has been described as lions led by donkeys. So BBC presenters are under strict orders not to allow anyone to say the word genocide. And if anyone says genocide in an interview, they immediately stop them and correct them. Hopefully, now that an independent UN commission declared that what Israel is doing is genocide, the BBC will change its mind and lift the ban on the word genocide. But I think the BBC has been incredibly pro-Israeli, only reported the Israeli side of the narrative, and they frequently have Israeli spokespersons, but they never have Palestinian spokespersons, let alone Hamas speakers. And I listened carefully to what the Israeli military spokesmen say. And it's very rare for them to say anything truthful. So Israeli propaganda is a pack of lies, and the BBC simply reports the Israeli lies, and
they never investigate these lies.
They cannot
check them.
They can't investigate them because Israel wouldn't allow BBC journalists to go into Gaza.
Let me go back a little bit about the myths that are prevalent about the Palestinians in the mainstream media. Besides that, the Palestinians never miss an opportunity for peace. Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel, kept talking about a generous offer that he gave the Palestinians at Camp David. And you wrote about this in your book. Was Ehud Barak's offer a generous offer to the Palestinians and that they declined?
You're talking about the Camp David summit of July 2000,
yes,
which was convened by Bill Clinton. And Barak claimed he made a generous offer to the Palestinians, that Arafat turned him down flat and made a strategic decision to resort to violence. And as soon as the summit failed, Barak pointed the finger at Arafat and blamed him for the failure, and went back to Israel, and he said, there is no Palestinian partner for peace. This was extremely unfortunate and damaging statement to make, because there was a Palestinian partner for peace, a genuine partner for peace, but his terms were not adequate, and that's why they were rejected. Now, to go back to the origins of this summit meeting, it was Barak's idea, and he persuaded Clinton to convene the summit. And he thought that he and Clinton will corner Arafat and bully him into signing on the dotted line. And the summit lasted 15 days, but Barak never engaged directly with Arafat. And he kept increasing the offer that he made. But the last offer was the Palestinians were to have 91% of the West Bank, but no sovereignty over the Muslim holy places in the old city of Jerusalem. So the sticking points were refugees, no right of return of the Palestinian refugees, and no Palestinian sovereignty over the holy Muslim places in Jerusalem. So Barak was responsible for the failure of the summit, and his claim that there is no Palestinian partner for peace had far-reaching consequences, because all Israelis, left, right, and center, believed him. And then there was an election in January 2001. Barak was running against Ariel Sharon, the leader of the Likud. And if there is no Palestinian partner for peace, you don't vote for a party that advocates negotiations. You vote for a strongman who is good at killing Arabs.
Yeah.
And Sharon fitted the bill. He was elected 2001, and since then the right has been in power ever since. And since, for the last 25 years, Israel has been moving steadily to the right, steadily towards an overtly racist position towards the Palestinians.
And during these 20 years, they have been applying this policy of mowing the lawn. Can you tell me more about it?
In 2005, Israel withdrew unilaterally from the Gaza Strip. And Israeli propaganda had it that they were giving the Palestinians an opportunity to turn the Gaza Strip into the Singapore of the Middle East.
Yeah.
The truth was different. The truth is that in January 2006, Hamas won a fair and free election and proceeded to form a government. The election was not just in Gaza, but it was in Gaza and the West Bank, and it was a fair and free election. But Israel refused to recognize the Hamas-led government. Israel's Western allies, the United States and the European Union, to their eternal shame, sided with Israel in refusing to recognize the Hamas-led, the democratically elected government, and resorted to economic warfare to undermine the government. There was a plot to drive Hamas out of power. Hamas preempted a Fatah coup d'etat by seizing power in Gaza. This was in 2007. Since then, Gaza and the West Bank has been kept separate by Israel. Israel imposed a blockade on Gaza back in 2007. And a blockade is a form of collective punishment which is prescribed under international law. Hamas tried a diplomatic route. It chose the parliamentary road to power, and then it offered Israel to negotiate about a long-term truce, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Israel refused to negotiate. So it's not Hamas, it's Israel that refused to negotiate. In 2008, Egypt brokered a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel in June 2008. And the ceasefire worked. Hamas respected the ceasefire until November, when Israel violated it by attacking Gaza and killing 6 Hamas fighters. Israel violated the ceasefire. And I'm a historian. I've studied the subject. And as far as I understand, every single ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas was violated by Israel. Not a single ceasefire agreement has been violated by Hamas. So Israel is the intransigent power, and since 2008, since Operation Cast Lead, which was the first Israeli military offensive in Gaza, by my count, there have been 8. The current round of hostilities, the current genocide in Gaza, is the 8th military assault on Gaza. And the worst operation until the current one was 2014, and you will remember that offensive, and it led you to start the movement We Are Not Numbers.
Yes, I lost a brother in that war.
You lost a brother in that war, and in the current war, I believe you lost 21 members of your family. And the cynicism of the Israelis is revealed by the phrase mowing the lawn, which means it's something that Israel does periodically without end, like cutting the grass in your garden. Every couple of years, Israel moves into Gaza with a lot of military force, destroys a lot of the housing, civilian infrastructure, degrades the military capabilities of Hamas. And under this rubric, the next war is always around the corner. That's why there have been successive Israeli attacks on Gaza as part of this policy, which is a non-policy, because this is a political conflict. There is no military solution to this conflict, but Israel keeps piling military force. And there is an Israeli saying, if force doesn't work, use more force. But it's an asinine idea, because force doesn't work in Gaza because it's the wrong means to resolve the conflict. And it would only lead to more bloodshed and more violence.
And beyond wars, policies like blockade and movement restriction and the de-development of the economy in Gaza, they serve wider political goals. How does that fit into the longer strategy towards Gaza?
Sarah Roy is a Jewish American scholar. Her parents were Holocaust survivors, and she is the leading expert on Gaza. She has written 5 books on Gaza. The first one was called The Gaza Strip, a study in the political economy of de-development. And that explains the basic Israeli strategy towards Gaza since 1967, which is to prevent the development of Gaza, actively to take measures that would prevent industrialization and development in Gaza, to keep Gaza dependent, and to exploit Gaza for cheap labor and a market for Israeli goods. So that's the basic Israeli strategy towards Gaza. In 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza because the game was not worth the candle, because Hamas succeeded in raising the price for the Israeli occupation and drove Israel to retreat. How does this fit into the bigger picture of settler colonialism? Well, I said that the logic of settler colonialism is the elimination of the native. So the basic Zionist aim in this conflict is to build a Jewish state on as large an area of Palestine as possible, with as few Arabs inside its borders as possible. That's the basic strategy, and this explains what the Netanyahu government is doing today. On the West Bank, the systematic ethnic cleansing of Palestine, the arming of the settlers, the encouragement of the settlers in the violence against the Palestinians, orders to the Israeli army to protect the settlers and not to protect Palestinians. So the systematic ethnic cleansing of the West Bank. And in Gaza, the aim was ethnic cleansing, but it hasn't worked so far, so Israel has gone a stage further to carry out the genocide in Gaza. These are all consequences of the logic of settler colonialism.
And you recently published a paper about the scholasticide in Gaza. And I think everyone agrees with you that there is a policy of scholasticide in Gaza. Israel is destroying the universities in Gaza, all the universities, more than 90% of the schools. Students in Gaza haven't gone to schools and universities for the past 2 years. It is easy to argue that there is scholasticide in Gaza after the 7th of October during this genocide. But my question to you, in your research, did you find any type of scholasticide before the genocide started in Gaza, after the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in 1967?
Since 1948, Israel has been hostile to Palestinian education. And I don't need to tell you the importance of education for the Palestinian national project. It's crucial.
It is.
And you are an example of, you are from Gaza, you have a degree from a Gaza university in Gaza, you got a achieving scholarship from the British government to do an MA in journalism at Leeds, and here you are, a really important journalist recording what is happening in Palestine. So that's why Israel was hostile to Palestinian education as part of its overall policy of suppressing Palestinian nationalism. But in Gaza, things have reached an incredible level of destruction. Scholasticide is not a word you would find in a dictionary. It was coined by Karma Nabulsi, who is my colleague and friend at Oxford. And what it means is the systematic destruction of an educational system. And there is no other way to describe what Israel is doing to Palestinian education in Gaza than scholasticide. Israel has bombed, damaged or destroyed 512 schools. Israel has bombed or destroyed or leveled completely all 11 universities in Gaza. Israel has bombed libraries, archives, mosques, bookshops, and this is all part of a policy of completely destroying the educational system in Gaza. This involved the killing of something like 5,000 students, the targeting of a lot of academics, including the poet Rifat Al-Arir, who who I believe was your teacher and your
Yes.
mentor, targeted assassination of academics. Also, one aspect of this is that Israel has bombed or damaged 31 out of the 36 hospitals in Gaza. So it's an attack on the health system, including destroying the medical schools in Gaza. So Israel is killing health care people, doctors and nurses, arresting some doctors and torturing them, but preventing the training of new medical staff to take over. So this is all part of a policy which is scholasticide. Now, Israel's excuse for attacking schools and universities and hospitals is that Hamas uses them, and the Hamas, the command and control centers. Well, how many command and control centers does Hamas need? 520. And Israel has never produced evidence that Hamas uses civilians as human shield. We have plenty of evidence that Israel uses civilians as human shield, but not that Hamas uses them. So most of the Israeli claims about Hamas people in hospitals and in universities and in schools, they're barefaced lies, and they don't justify this policy of scholasticide.
I think it's very easy for even average people to debunk these lies about Israel, to debunk these lies that Israel claim about the Palestinians. But what surprises me is that political figures, media personalities, they still repeat these Israeli lies without questioning them, without investigating them, without debunking them. So my question to you as an academic and historian, what is the role of historians, especially those who live in the UK, when they watch a genocide? Should they just study history or evaluate it and add their insight to it?
The role of the historian of this conflict has always been important, and as you know, I belong to a small group of so-called new historians, which includes Ilan Pape and Benny Morris, and between us we publish books that constitute a frontal attack on all the myths that surround the birth of Israel in 1948 and the First Arab-Israeli War. More recently, Benny Morris has veered to the extreme right and has become an apologist for the Israeli regime. Ilan Pape and I still remain faithful to the mandate of the historian, which is to evaluate, not just to chronicle what happened, but to evaluate. So if you wish, in my work, I hold a mirror to Israelis to look at the mirror and see what they're really like. In the present conflict in Gaza, when there is so much at stake, not only for the Palestinians, not only for the people in Gaza, not only for the Palestinian nation, but for the future of international law and the rule-based international order. There is so much at stake. The role of the historian is all important to reveal the truth about this conflict and to point a finger at the culprit, the villain in this conflict. And as I've mentioned earlier, my study of history leads me to believe that Hamas has tried to reach a peaceful agreement, a negotiated agreement with Israel, but Israel has been the intransigent party. And you cannot really understand what is happening in the occupied territories today without understanding the background, the historical background. That's our role, to explain the background to the conflict today. And I particularly want to draw attention to Britain's role in the tragedy of Palestine, going back to the Balfour Declaration. If I had to summarize the history of the British mandate in Palestine from 1922 to 1948, I would say Britain stole Palestine from the Palestinians and gave it to the Zionists. Yet no British Prime Minister of either party has ever acknowledged Britain's historic role in what happened to the Palestinians. And no British Prime Minister has ever issued an apology. And look at the present Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who described himself as an unqualified Zionist. His sympathy is entirely with Israel, and his policy is to support Israel, military cooperation, intelligence support, arms supplies to Israel at a time when Israel is committing genocide. And under the 1948 Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, Britain has a duty, not a choice, not discretion. Britain has a duty to act to prevent genocide. This means sanctioning Israel, comprehensive arms control, comprehensive arms ban on sales of arms to Israel, and Britain should stop buying arms from Israel. But instead, Britain continues to exonerate Israel and give it material and military support and diplomatic protection at the UN.
I don't know how accurate this saying is, but when we were young, we were told, if you want to study the future or the present, one must study the history. As a historian, tell me what gives you hope. Before our interview, you said that you are hopeful for the long term. What gives you hope? What have you found in your research and studies?
I'm pessimistic in the short term. The Middle East has never been in a more dismal state than it is today, with genocide being perpetrated by Israel. I'm shaken to my core by the Western support for Israel, the complicity of the Western mainstream media with Israel, the complicity of the Western governments in Israel's war crimes. That's all deeply, deeply depressing. But I also believe that apartheid in the 21st century is not sustainable, and that we are beginning to witness the unraveling of the Zionist project. Israel has turned itself into an international pariah. Israel is completely isolated. The ICC has issued arrest warrants for war crimes for Netanyahu and his former defense minister. This is unprecedented, that Israel is accused of war crimes. So Israel is more and more isolated. Later on this month, at the meeting of the General Assembly of the United Nations in New York, Britain, France, Australia, and Canada will recognize Palestine. So there is a disconnect between Western governments and public opinion. But because of Israeli atrocities and genocide, public opinion is shifting very dramatically in favor of the Palestinians and against Israel. And in the longer term, public opinion, governments will have to catch up with public opinion. So I think we are witnessing the beginning of a trend of governments turning against Israel, being unwilling to be complicit anymore with Israel. And at the moment, it's only America that supports Israel all the way and continues to supply the arms and munitions that enable Israel to persist in committing genocide. So Israel is isolated and America is isolated. Once Britain and France recognized Palestine, four of the five permanent members of the Security Council will recognize Palestine. America would be the odd one out. So America and Israel, because they are complicit in genocide, will become more and more isolated. Public opinion would move against them, and eventually the Zionist project would unravel, both because of tensions and cleavages from within, and with our signs of that, possibly leading to a civil war, but more importantly, because of international pressure, external pressure on Israel to desist. And the international community has let down the Palestinians very badly for the last century. But one day the situation will change and the international community would live up to its obligation towards the Palestinian people.
Professor Avi Shlaim, what a powerful discussion. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
And thank you for what you do. Thank you for your work, for your research, for your studies, and for speaking up for the people in Palestine, and for giving your truth to the world.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deep and powerful conversations about Zionism will never be discussed in the mainstream media. That's why it is imperative that we, the free people of the world, start and support new media outlets that go deep into these discussions that need to be heard and discussed. That's why I urge you to support Palestine Deep Dive with as little as £2 per month. Go to palestinedeepdive.com/support.